FedEx Freight is not only the largest carrier by revenue, they also tend to be the tip of the spear when it comes to entering new markets. So when FedEx is actively pushing their FedEx Direct service, it means the industry is about to change in about 3 to 5 years. FedEx is doing like this FedEx Freight Direct, and like they're really pushing it because every one of our customers that uses them is like, hey, we want to use FedEx now. They're just giving them pricing. It's like what I call gray glove, which is, I'm coining that term now. I might trademark it. So it's not white glove, it's gray glove. LTL carriers do curbside. White glove carriers go inside the house and assemble everything, but what the actual service that the consumer wants is just an Amazon delivery, regardless of if it's leggings or if it's a sofa. They just want it left there, and they just want to be able to easily get it in their house. And they don't want it rained on or stolen, right? LTL carriers are missing a huge opportunity because they, instead of attacking that market, they're pricing themselves out. It's a better delivery than freight.
Is there another carrier in the market that will pick up and do those gray glove or white glove types of deliveries where maybe they just bring it to the threshold or whatnot? Are there other carriers in the market? The answer is yes, there is. The next issue is, who can you work with that has access to these carriers, but also can upload them into tech to blend them in with what their current process is for the rest of their supply chain? That's probably the biggest missing factor, is the tool and the identity of the carriers that will do what you need them to do, and then making them talk to each other.
Yeah, and I'd even say that like the actual solution is to have one carrier do the whole thing and do it well and do it fast. And the reason that that doesn't exist is because there are a few companies out there, and we use them at Rocket, that do the whole mile, so to speak, but they're slower. They maybe don't want it on a pallet, and they maybe don't have the same technology. Claudia, part of what I was wondering what your take on it is, how often do you see a customer who doesn't even realize that there's a specialty carrier to use until they work with us? And they're like, oh, we can use Pilot or we can use SEPA. This is awesome.
I would say more often than not, we're getting clients that don't realize that there's another carrier, a specialty carrier that offers these solutions. And more often than not, that we're the first people to bring that to them.
Yeah, and the reason, and I'll come back to you on this, Claudia, the reason that not very many people know about it is there's only like 2 or 3 companies that even have one portal to rate these carriers in. Me and Michael were at Home Delivery World, and most of these carriers don't have APIs. Up until the last 2 or 3 years, they finally have APIs that you can write into and that you can say, I want rating, dispatch, tracking. And so at Rocket, the idea is that when we onboard a client, they can use freight carriers for curbside. Curbside still exists, but we're giving them another option if they're going to a residence. It's like FedEx Freight Direct, but it's, more of a specialty carrier. We also have several clients who are integrated with FedEx Freight Direct. Would you say, Claudia, that do you have an example of a client who uses us for their freight carriers, their FedEx Freight Direct, and we blend in Pilot and SEPA?
We definitely have a client that utilizes our LTL standard carriers, our specialty carriers, and FedEx Direct. They are actually dispersing their freight, depending if it's palletized, depending the type of freight it is, throughout all of those carriers in the network.
So we have several clients, one in particular who's very high volume this time of year. They use our standard LTL carriers in our TMS, but they also use FedEx Freight Direct service. And now we've recently just introduced them to home delivery carriers. And now on each shipment, they can see all types of carriers, and depending on the type of service they want to go with, and if it's palletized, they've got a good cost-effective option.
We have several clients that use LTL carriers, FedEx Direct, and we started to mix in the home delivery carriers. And we have one client in particular, which their volume is significantly higher throughout this time of year. So now we offer all those rates that they can see, so they can have a blended model and do a cost comparison. They don't have to predetermine what carrier they can use. They have the list of all carriers once they enter in each quote, depending on where the load is going and if it's palletized and what kind of product they're shipping.
So basically, they could differ by one shipment going to a residence, not on a pallet, they could use FedEx Direct. And the next shipment goes to a business and it's a bunch of furniture, and they can use ABF or RNL. The industry currently, you can use LTL carriers, you can do white glove, but there isn't a real solution that's tech enabled and has people where you can use LTL and home delivery in the same portal without losing the management or the brokerage customer service.
I look at them as modes. I mean, we got LTL is a mode, but then we start to look at middle and final mile, those home delivery type carriers. The biggest issue and pain point is having to go to specific portals for each one. Even if you're using a rate aggregator, basic TMS for your LTL, so that you can look at all your rates, you're still having to go to a FedEx Home Direct site to see what the price is from pickup to full delivery, and going to a final mile carrier that you might be shipping your LTL to and then having that deliver it, or another one that's going to be first to final. So those are the issues that we've never really gotten away from. What Rocket's doing and has is tech to pull that first mile in, allowing you to look at middle and final. FedEx Home Direct is one of the big ones on the market now that most people are familiar with, because they are a standard LTL carrier that's offering, a little bit more advanced service. We can pull that in, but we can go all the way to some other carriers that are trained, and their whole business model is to pick up unpalletized freight, can be palletized, but unpalletized freight, and then deliver it. So do the first and final all in one swoop, but they can do that threshold or that room of choice and debris removal. And we can also bring that into the TMS. So all of a sudden, the real value comes in being able to compare pricing across all of those modes in a single rate table, but also increasing or giving you that bandwidth back of really starting to understand and strategically pick the right move versus having to go to every portal, write down the price, and then think which is the best move for this shipment.
Yeah, and because it's cumbersome to go into multiple portals and rate shop at the carrier level for anything outside of just LTL, and when we're talking home delivery and see what kind of options you have, the actual strategy by the big market players, they just predetermine who they're giving that freight to. They do these massive RFPs and they award freight and lanes and markets to certain carriers for a year. And it doesn't matter if that carrier performs. Once it's awarded, it's like pulling teeth to be able to pull it back and give it to a different provider. That's just one layer. And then if you want to talk about cost, and who doesn't talk about freight costs right now in this market, especially e-commerce brands, if you could just take the two biggest players in final mile and home delivery, and every time you run a shipment through, be able to see both of their prices, you're going to save 15 to 20% across the US just by having two of them. If you add three, if you add four, you probably don't want to go any deeper on the bench than four. But everybody has their niche. And in LTL, this has been done. Many of the big players have done this in LTL. They have regional, they have super regional, and they have national carriers. You can see them all on every shipment. Heck, some of them even add in like 14 third parties into one portal. So you see FedEx 11 times. That's stupid. In the home delivery, no one's done it. There hasn't been a rate aggregator to be able to do it at the shipment level. And it's mostly because there hasn't been the right tech in place from the carrier side. It's an incentive issue. Everybody's building a final mile network instead of having a connection to the final mile network. So that's what we're trying to fix. Yeah, I think we can probably do that in the next 2 years, but the focus and everything that I've said there wouldn't matter if we were a tech company. There's a lot of tech companies doing it, but you have to have customer service and actual brokerage support when something goes wrong, because it's home deliveries, something will go wrong. So
yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, adding all of that in a single tech, it only exacerbates the problem if you don't have some sort of customer success from the company you're working with. You took 2 steps forward by bringing all the rates in, but then you went a step backwards because now you got to remember, who did that rate go with? And it only gets worse if you add final mile. So I agree there. You have to have somebody you can talk to for all general inquiries on anything and get back to you quick. Yeah.
Somebody who owes you an answer, right? Like if you ask them, it's their responsibility to figure it out. There's been a few companies who have done this and they missed because of the customer service component.
Yeah.
And if you break it down, if you're shipping to a business, it doesn't go wrong all that often. And when it does, that business has received freight many, many times and they understand that things go wrong. If you're shipping to a consumer, that consumer doesn't receive freight shipments all that often. How many times do you buy a large $4,000 sofa? You want it delivered correctly. So when they call our customer upset that something's not going well, and our customer, if they emailed us and we say we'll get back to you in 48 hours, that's not an option. They have a customer on the line or in the chat that's blowing them up and they're going to leave a bad review. So it's like having a microscope on all the problems, and you really do need somebody to actually not just help you, but somebody who can be effective at causing a change. They need the tech, they need the carriers, but if you don't put it all together, it's not worth that much. So